tried to give you a simplification of the torso. My notes say that we did, a few weeks back, we did a demonstration of muscles attaching, having an origin and insertion. And then we worked on the torso. And because it's my feeling that the torso is the site of the movement in the figure, we need to put that into action and identify the muscles we talked about last time. Otherwise, it's just academic. So to review, you recall that I had a plan of a very simple rib cage and a box-like pelvis. And we attached muscles in 3 places. To the front, the rectus abdominis. To the side, the external oblique. And to the back, either side of the spine, called the erector spinae muscles. Translated, that means straightener of the spine muscles. But what I did was I prepared a few drawings, not spending too much time on each one, to try to illustrate the effect of these muscles on the position and relative movement in the torso, thorax, relating to pelvis. Extremely important because unless this part of the figure displays some movement, there's got to be a flaw in your sculpture, your painting, or your drawing of the figure. That's just the way it is. It's built to move. It's a plan whereby the elements are designed to move against each other. And the muscles are the harness that put that into action, and the bones allow and disallow certain sorts of movement. And so I put together these drawings to illustrate the movement between these 2 major zones. The first zone being the thorax, rib cage, if you will, and the second, pelvis. Very simple. It would be good if you were contemplating doing any figurative work in your careers. Try to consider this one concept. The idea then is that you need to interpret just the torso, which comes from the word for stem or stalk. Interpret this richly enough so that it moves, because the alternative is not acceptable. To have it stiff and immovable. It doesn't happen that way. So in setting up this drawing, I've got this tip. So that presumably rib cage through here respects that axis. And other elements reporting that same degree of tip. And that this on this side would then be compressed, and this would be stretched. For the pelvis, we have this tilted. And so as this is down, this is up, and vice versa on the other side. That's called contrapposto, positioning against. And as you stand, often it's the case, I'm doing it now, that on the side where the hip is high, the shoulder is low. Why? Because you're lazy, and you're just sort of balancing shifting all your weight over onto this one supporting leg. The line that is introduced to make the connection, the first connection, is called the center line, midline. Surgeons would call it the linea alba, because it's white. And after the sternum, you pick up on that line, and it describes the contour of the torso torso on the surface. It gives you the basic length of the torso. It gives you the relative position of this mass against this mass. And by its position relative to this profile, it tells you how much the figure is turned away or toward you, away from or toward you. It has all those features. So when you're constructing a torso, you have three lines, basically, in this view. You have this outside line. You have this outside line. Or you have this line. This is the one. This is the one to use. It has too many anatomical landmarks. Whole sternum, xiphoid process, the division between the rectus abdominis, navel, pubic bone, and for all the other reasons that I mentioned. The length of the torso, the plane change, the relative position of this to that. That's called the center line. The counterpart of center line on the back is the spine. So in other words, even if you don't see this line, it exists wherever elements of the figure are constructed bilaterally.
And the spine moves with it.
I'm going to show you. So the head is constructed bilaterally, has two sides. So presumably there's a center line here that would be useful in constructing a head. Arm, not so. Okay, enough with that. Different movement. Don't you see that you need to establish a certain shift between these two masses? And I would even urge you to, in figure drawing, just detach these just for a moment and think of this in space and think of this in space. You know, in art history, there was a great period of Greek sculpture, 800 to 500, where the torsos were magnificent but very rigid. The youth figures with the arms locked to the side, the archaic period. They're marvelous pieces, but they're conceived of as a block. You can still see the basic block in these pieces. What I'm saying is, for us now, just chop that. Think of this as a moving mass and this as a moving mass. The alternative is you're going to come out with a thing looking too rigid. So what have I done here? Analyzing this tip. I've got this tip. Presumably then we are comparing anatomical landmarks to each other. The landmarks here is the little bony roof over your arm. It's called the acromion process. The landmark here is the little bump on the pelvis in front, called the anterior, because it's in front, superior, because it's above the iliac spine. Here's pelvis. Or 1/2 of pelvis, called an innominate bone. So on this side, there's this shelf, right here. And at its terminus in the front of the figure, there's an extremely important landmark. That's the anterior superior iliac spine. And you want to relate that to its counterpart on the other side to see which way the pelvis is tipped. Why? Because I would suggest you don't want all your drawings to look like Greek archaic period figures. So the way to do that is introduce some movement. So these are different from each other. Watch the path of the center line here. The center these two masses. It starts with the sternum, comes off the sternum onto the upper abdomen, goes in at the waist. After the waist comes out and ties the pubic bone. There is actually a strap that runs from the end of the breastbone to the pelvis. It's called the midline, or the linea alba. It gives you too many things to ignore. Too many assets to that line to ignore it and just go for something that's easy to find over here, that is just a line like that, or a line over here that does this. This is loaded with information. And there really is a line here. It's deep, you don't see it, because the muscles of the abdomen come together at this point. As they go up, they separate, so you get to see this line on the model. Now, how do you read the pitch of this against that? There's a very easy way of envisioning how this is pitched in space against how that is pitched in space. In other words, we're talking about, just to amplify it a little bit, talking about position of thorax against position of pelvis. And we suggested that you want to tie those together. Don't you see that this part of this line parallels the basic axis of the pelvis? So if you can just read the position, the pitch of the abdominal wall, you've got it. It's right here. This line is parallel to the basic pitch of the pelvis. And the clue is right on the surface of the figure. To get the pitch of the upper body, presumably something like that in this drawing, you read pitch of breastbone, sternum. It's easy. These are two major elements right on the surface of the figure that are direct clues in a direct relationship to the basic positions of these two masses relative to each other. Why am I going over all this? Because if your figures are too stiff, you won't like it. And I won't like it. And the sculpture teachers won't like it. Etc., etc. So you're looking for movement. If it doesn't move, it's all over. So now the figure has a built-in system whereby weight is transferred to floor. It's not like piling up bricks on each other to transfer weight to floor. Although some drawings in some classes look sort of like that. It's a counterbalancing system to transfer weight to floor. And so this is probably worth an explanation just separate from these other ones. We have to start with the spine. My feeling is that if you are somewhat familiar with the construction of the figure, you'll be a better interpreter of it. Spine has these four curves that we've mentioned before. Right away, you see this idea of piling things up to get weight to floor no longer applies. It don't happen that way. So here's head. This guy's underneath the cranium to support it. This curve of the back accommodates the organs of the thorax. This curve dives in to support weight of everything above that. This is transferring weight to pelvis, pelvis to leg, leg to foot, foot to floor. And then this dives back as this did to accommodate organs of pelvis, this area of abdomen. So if we put on this line, here's the center line of the back. If we put on this line, here's sternum, breastbone. This line then will be the counterpart of that, put on the front of the figure. Sternum, and you come off sternum to upper abdomen, and guess what? This piece of this center line ends right where rib cage ends. So when you see this little value change you're drawing from life, which we call waist, the waist, or the terminus of the rib cage, probably rib number 10, this second segment is finished. And the last segment starts up, abdomen, ties to pubic bone. That's the center line, the midline, the median line, the linea alba, whatever you want to call it, as this is the center line of the back. So how do you read the pitch of this? You look at sternum. They're parallel. How do you read the pitch of pelvis? You look at abdominal wall. They're parallel. Easy. Not a problem. So, when I'm setting up a drawing, I'm really anxious to introduce as much movement as I legitimately can. Okay? Because the alternative is something we're not interested in. And so, path of median line, presumably, would be a good way of getting this important relationship started. You get it done by drawing one line. One line. If this line were underestimated, there's less movement. The way I would phrase it is this way, that the line that connects these two major masses of torso has to be rich enough. This is a richer curve compared to this line. So you know what I mean, rich. If this fails and is more like this than like this, depending on the pose, of course, then you're minimizing the action, you're going to make it stiff, and you're going to wonder why, day after day, month after month, year after year, in this studio and in others, your drawings look so stiff. You've got to give your attention to this zone and get this mass moving against that mass. This mass moving against this mass. That moving against that. So what happens in back? We have a center line. Cervical spine goes in. Thoracic spine out. Lumbar spine carrying a lot of the weight to sacrum. Sacrum is a wedge-like piece that fits between piece of pelvis on right side, piece of pelvis on left side. It needs a connecting piece because it needs to be a solid ring in order for weight to come down and be transferred and out to legs, and then from legs to feet, which are tripods, and then feet to floor. There's a lot of pressure here. transferred around and out on the surgical neck of the trochanter to the trochanter, and then down to a massive heel bone, huge for obvious reasons. So now we need this to move. If you interpret these curves richly enough, again, appropriate to the pose, not just always doing this no matter what, obviously, then the chances are that your drawing will respond better, will move, will be a little more lifelike and not so frozen. So how do you read these angles? This is the acromion process to acromion process, or to put it simply, just shoulder to shoulder. What you're going to see when you look at a shoulder is, in the front view, you see a little bump at the end of the clavicle, and you may see a little flat place after that, and then you'll see the deltoid muscle. Usually you see a little bump right here. That's not this little flat roof over your arm bone. That's the end of the clavicle. In the back view, you're liable to see spinal scapula. End of this spine is this little flat place. I'll show you. Here's scapula in this position. This is the little roof part up over your arm bone. In fact, from which your arm bone hangs in a way. And then clavicle in front meets that and ties onto the sternum. So to get your arm out to the side, you have this bracketing system of the spine of the scapula, ending in a acromion process, and the brace of the clavicle meeting it. And from that bracket, you have arm hanging to the side. But that's another story, anyhow. Model is posing up here. You have to get this thing going. Look for some movement here as much as you can. Phrase a question to yourself. Which shoulder is lower? Which is higher? Ask yourself some questions. Don't just stand there and draw the shoulders like this. In this instance, how do you read the pitch of the pelvis in this view? Usually you can find those depressions that are the result of the bone at this point being rather full. And underneath that, you get a little shadow area. And that this is safer. This is safer. So the classic way of interpreting the pitch of the pelvis in this view is to check those 2 points. And drawing from memory here, I'm just setting this so that I'm displaying this sort of thing. I'll set up the drawing for you in a minute from scratch. And then you have to be concerned with transferred weight to floor. So the matter of just the proper position of these feet is extremely important, obviously. Okay. Let me set one up quickly, and then I'll show you just a few slides. Front view. Shoulder. I've already answered one question that I posed to myself. This shoulder is high, that one's low. Center line. If I put the center line over here, it makes a big difference. I'm going to put it over here and have this figure that I'm drawing turned away from us this way. As the figure turns away, this center point visually approaches this margin and distances itself from this margin. 1, 2, 3. You know what the upper body is doing, you know what pelvis is doing. Already, one line. You know how long this is going to be. One line. You know the relation of pelvis to upper body? Because these two in this pose are about in line with each other. If I had drawn this out here a little further, then it would indicate a torso that was doing that. And you know by its relation to this edge, the degree of the turn of the figure. You get all that with one line plus the contour of the surface. And still people say, I don't see the center line. Maybe they'll be less reluctant to do after this. Pitch of pelvis. You know how to find that. Anterior superior iliac spine. And then transfer of weight to the floor. What should we do? Looks like that's possible. The reason I go through like this is that I like to work with an overview rather than finishing the head and the ear, getting all this done, the nose and all this, and have nothing down here. Self-portrait.
I mean, I'm just trying to figure out where you determine for the back bend.
For the what?
For the back of the foot, does that line up with the sternum?
Well, oftentimes this happens, but I'm just drawing from memory, so I have no reference. But you can feel your way, if you're drawing from memory, you can feel whether it looks like your whole drawing is doing that or not, by considering transfer of weight to floor. It was one of those classic axioms of the French Academy that when you set up a drawing, you didn't start with the figure. You came down a certain amount, that's where the top of the head would be. You came up a certain amount, that's where the foot would be. You crisscrossed the paper to find the center, that would be the pubic bone. And then you developed a drawing in accordance with that. No drawing ever went off the page. The problem with that was it was too many rules, and it dealt with measuring first and drawing later. And if you're like me, you don't like too many rules when you're trying to do something that comes from other parts of you. Your soul, something you have to say, your feelings. You feel like you're constricted by too many rules, and that's not good. So my feeling is, proceed with the drawing. Get to the drawing. And I'm just suggesting that perhaps this is probably the best way of sorting out this movement in the torso routine. Okay, so I have my overview. Now, last time we mentioned side muscles. I gave you a diagram of how to attach side muscles. In life, they show up right here. It goes rib cage, end of rib cage or waist, side muscles. Well, you know, I've mentioned that you want to find pelvis here. Usually you can't see the bony prominence of the pelvis at that point, but you know where they are because side muscles tie to pelvis. So this is as good. If you can find those two shapes, that's as good as finding where pelvis is, so you relate this bump to that, you got it. And then base of abdomen, we're going to change this, it's going a little off center. That, by the way, is why I'm drawing with charcoal. And spend a lot of time here, that's dangerous, you know. Spend a lot of time in one place at the expense of everything else. Why? You wind up, if you feel this is going well, you wind up pitching these pieces to this and not to the whole. That's a trap. Pitch your head, prep something for head. I don't have time to do the features now. I only have a leg here. Leg is cylindrical. I think I'm going to drop in a new plan for the position of this leg. I would suggest that if you can make, by a single line, that radical a change in a drawing, that's a good way to start. Rather than a lot of shapes and kneecap in the wrong place and values all over the place and everything in the wrong position. Foot is a wedge. Drop down, start leg. Center line. You see the leg doesn't start from up here, so on each side I want to make sure the leg is dropping down sufficiently. And over here, I guess that's all right. Might be a little long. From this angle where I am, it looks fine, but I don't know how it looks out front. And one last thing on this that's sort of tangent to what we're saying before I just review what we're doing here. Arms can be doing anything, and it wouldn't affect this. So when you're setting up a figure, why deal with the arms right away, even if they're interesting and they're wonderful. The positions are great. We've had a model here that poses and does all sorts of really wonderful things with her hands while she poses. But that doesn't have anything to do with transfer weight to floor, not much. So you get this moving and you get transfer weight to floor. Then you can do whatever you want up here. If you want that over here, that's possible. If you want it up here, that's possible. How about flex? How about over here? Doesn't make any difference. That's not important. This is important. So the bones get bigger and bigger and massive and bigger, and finally down here, there's so much weight that goes to the foot that two bones have fused, have joined to make sure this is strong enough. We need to talk again. I didn't do it this time much, but we need to talk again and identify a little more closely where the abdominal muscle is, where the external oblique muscle is, the drawn, the erector spinae muscle, those three. But I think we needed to have a look at how these are used